Guys, let's get our camera going here. Hang on a second. What's happening? But hey, it's good to see you guys. Seems like there's always going to be some little hiccup here. Let's just try what's going on here. Some reason I'm not getting my camera. Where are we? Please be patient with me. I'll be right back. All right. So come on, camera. There it is. Let's just try to make sure it's all. You guys get to see all the behind the scenes fun here. And there we go. Yay. Okay. I'm streaming with a Canon 5D Mark III, which is pretty cool. And listen, you guys, tell me. I'm going to pull this window over here so I can see where you guys are from, but I really want to hear. There we go. So here's who we've got. We've got Christian from Santiago, Chile. Wow, incredible. And Sean Kim from Oceanside, California. Hey, not too far away. Yes, there you are. And Phoenix. Okay, not too far away, and basically in the same continent here. We've got Jared, there we go. And Paulo from South Africa and Portugal, but you live in Belgium now. Wow, that's quite a journey. And Gulfri, I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name, from Brazil. And Avram from Israel, Shalom. And Brian from New York, Neveth from Dubai. This is incredible. Benedict from Scotland. I love Scotland. I mean, I love all these different places, but there's a special place. I am part Scottish. My mother was a Mackenzie, so hey, what can I say? So we're going to have some fun today. I've got a lot of props and a lot of things to show you. So let's get to it. So if you guys don't know who I am, I'm Marc Silber. I am a published author in Carmel, California. And I want to first of all tell you that this episode is brought to you by our friends at Bay Photolab. They can print all sorts of stuff. Here's a few examples of cards they printed for our family. We send these out. Christmas cards. This one, my wife took this photograph in Yosemite. This is an old photograph. You can create books with them. You can create, these are my own books that I create just from prints that I've made with them. And you can see I just put it in this album here. And it's really handy to do this, by the way. You can make your own books. This is one of the photographs I'm going to be talking about today. But check out our friends at Bay Photo Lab. Jared will put the link up. You get 25% off in your first order, which is always good, right? Okay, guys, here's what I'm going to do. This is a little informal, but I'm going to tell you the story that I wrote about. You know, one of the cool things that's fun about writing a book is you get to put your stories in there. And I think people really love stories. But this was a story that's kind of unusual. This is when I was in high school. I had an interesting high school. I went to about 3 or 4 different high schools, kind of lost track. I didn't get kicked out of them, and that somebody said, okay, Mark, you must have gotten kicked out of all those high schools. I wasn't that big a troublemaker. Interesting circumstances. This was in the 60s. Things were a little different then. I ended up in my junior year going to a really good high school in Vermont, which is in the northeast part of the United States. And it was a very good education. I came back to California to do my senior year of high school, the last year of high school. And I went to this the previous high schools I'd gone to were actually rather small. The one in New England had about 400 students. The one in California that I returned to had 2,000 students. It was huge by comparison. I felt like I just got swallowed up in it. And to me, I was redoing everything I'd already done in my junior year. So I was bored out of my mind. Not on top of that was the fact that I just really wasn't inspired creatively. I don't know, I was in a huge slump. I was a pretty good photographer by then. I had my own dark room, and I'd made a lot of prints and a couple of dummy books and that sort of thing. But it just kind of settled down. I was in a complete slump and bored to death. I called it a prison. It felt like I was not only in a kind of a physical prison, but in a mental prison. And I wanted out of there. And I tried to figure my way out. I actually was going to drop out of school. Now, that wasn't going to go over well with my family at all. I mean, my parents were not going along with that. So I schemed and figured out somehow or another. I don't even know how I came across this. There's no internet to do this kind of Google searching, but somehow I found out that I had enough credits to graduate. I just needed one more social study credit after my first semester. So that's the first half of the year. So after January, if I just got this one other credit, I could graduate in June. And I knew somebody who was running a project in Mexico, kind of like it was a volunteer project. He was bringing students there to work on a medical dispensary in the remote regions of Mexico above Mazatlan. I don't have a map here. I should have brought one, but you can look at it. So I schemed on this and I said to him, I really want to go with you. And he said, well, you can. I'm only bringing 4 students. If you get approval from your parents and from the school. And I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. Okay. I went to my parents and they said, well, as long as you get approval from the principal, we'll go along with it. So I go to the principal of this school. This is a really kind of hard conservative school. They didn't do this kind of stuff. But somehow I got an appointment with him and I sold him on the idea of going there to work on this project. He paused. I wrote about this in the book. You can read the whole thing. There was a long pause, which was the longest moment of my life. If you've ever been in one of those circumstances where you're waiting for that other person to grant you freedom, that pause could last forever. He paused, he took his glasses off, he cleaned them, and I'm behind the scenes, I'm thinking, what is going on? Is he going to detain me because I'm trying to bust out of this school? I mean, what's going to happen? He puts his glasses back on, looks at me like this, and he says, son, I think we could make that work. If you've ever been involved in any kind of sales activity, where you close a deal and you have to kind of maintain your cool, you know exactly what this feels like. Inside, I'm going, what? Screaming, inside my head, whoa, yeah. And outwardly, I have to maintain my cool. So I'm like, well, thank you, sir. I think that is fantastic, and I will definitely, make this work. So I get out of there elated and basically started making plans and working towards, there was a lot of preparatory stuff. We had to get all kinds of stuff together that we were carrying down there. So for the next month or so, I was driving this cool old Jeep around, getting equipment ready and getting my own stuff ready. And one of the things I did was my uncle had gifted me this camera. This is a Rolleiflex. It had come in the mail a few months before this. I really had never used this camera. This, so that it produces a negative of this size. That's called a 2¼ inch square negative. But I'd never used this camera, so I'm pretty good with cameras. I can pretty much, it's like getting in a car to me, it might take you a minute to figure out where the gear shift is, and it's on this side or that side, depending what part of the world you're in. But I know how to drive, and I know how to drive a camera. So I figured this thing out, and I brought lots of rolls of film with me, like maybe 30 rolls of film. Each one has 12 exposures. That's all you get. Okay, 12 exposures, and I brought maybe 30 rolls. So I had, what is that? Okay. Packed my gear. We drove to Mexico in the Jeep. Took a couple days. We got to Mazatlan, which is pretty far, it's like 1,000 miles away. Then from there, we drove up into the upper mountains, upper reaches of this area, Sinaloa, Mexico. And it was a day by Jeep, a very rough road. We got to the end of the road and we entered this village. Now I'm going to start showing you some of the photographs that I took. I don't think I took any on the actual travel part, but when we got there, I started photographing. And this is kids in a classroom, as you can see, in this little village called Ahoya, Mexico. I think this is a pretty cool. Yeah, I was 17 years old, you guys. Okay. And I think I got some pretty amazing photographs. This geometry of these kids. Now, I'm not directing them, I'm not telling them what to do. And they're allowing me into their life to take photographs. But you can see none of them are really fixed on me. They're not seemingly distracted by me at all. The kid that's out of focus in the foreground is looking at me. But oftentimes, if you take a photograph, certainly in Mexico and many other countries, what you get is this very stiff, like they stand like this. And one of the things I learned to do was, what's cool about this camera is you look down into it. So when you're focusing it and when you're shooting, you still have your face is open to your subject. You're not hidden behind this camera, which makes it a cool camera for this type of photography. So often I would do this. I would take, my first shot and they're very stiff like this. And then I would keep pressing the shutter, but they wouldn't see that I was doing it because I'm just looking straight at them. That's actually a really handy tool you can use with any camera. Don't always look through the back of the camera because you're telling your subject, look, I'm taking your photograph. And this allows the connection, that human connection. We talked to Peter Hurley about that. That connection between you and your subject is so vital. Anyway, I got this connection with these kids, and I think the tonality of this is pretty awesome. You can see some of these. I'm going to show you different versions because over the years, I process these photographs differently. I don't always pull up the same image and do it exactly the same way. Let me get back to Lightroom here. That's what I'm using, by the way, you guys. So you can see, so here's that version, and then here's another version. Actually, that isn't very different. Okay, so here's another kid. Again, he's not seemingly distracted by me at all. What I'm still blown away by here I am, 17-year-old kid. I wasn't exactly a remarkable communicator at that age, but somehow I got an entrance and these guys allowed me into their life. Here's another version of processing it. I don't know why this keeps doing this. Sorry, guys. So you can see this was pretty much unprocessed. This was more like what the print looked like because these all were negatives. This was actually the print, and you can see what I did here is I bumped up the contrast, quite a bit more contrast, and it's a little longer exposure, but that brought out the tonality. And this is the same classroom. Here's some examples of ones I didn't actually print. You can see all the dust and dirt and stuff. I never even bothered cleaning this one up. I suppose I could. It's not a remarkable photograph to me. I think it's kind of cool that you have the kid over here, but I don't find that as any kind of meaningful photograph. These girls, and there's another version of it. This was okay. So after we were in this little village of Ahoya, Mexico, 2 days by foot from there in the upper reaches, we went to the area where we're going to build this medical dispensary. And this was a village which consisted of one hut and one family, but it was called a village. And this is inside. These girls were waiting for something. You can see they've got some supplies there. They've got some fruit, and the other one's got a jug, and they're waiting for something to happen. Again, they don't particularly seem like distracted or bothered, by me. this I believe is a better version of this print. It's cropped slightly differently. It's actually a little dark. I don't know. None of these are necessarily my final versions. I'm kind of showing you inside my Lightroom, and I probably have tweaked these. I don't know about you guys, but when I have photographs that I've had sitting there for a long time, every time I pull them out, I process them a little differently. I tweak them differently. I don't just do the same thing. But this again was shot with that camera. Oh, I wanted to show you one thing, guys. I'm just going to go back to this screen here. So again, if you may not be familiar with this term, what we do first of all, let's turn it right side up, is we make what's called a contact sheet, which is these negatives are placed on photosensitive paper, and you basically make a print. You see how they're just small prints, and it's called a contact sheet or a proof sheet. And from this, you go through it, and this is very similar. I mean, I'll show you in a second how Lightroom is arranged. It's pretty much they copied this. But you can go through it, and you have enough of an image there to see if you want to develop it or you want to print it in a larger form. So you may not be able to see it, but I've got some orange marks on here. That was one I wanted to print. And there's another one up here. I had a really good system. This was one roll of film, A1. This was the very first roll that I took in Mexico. And I had them all the way through, however many rolls it was. So I was pretty good. And here's the prints, the negatives that matches up with those contact prints. I was a pretty good, well-organized photographer, which is very important. But if we go to the grid view, you can see this is like a contact sheet, and I can make it as big as a contact sheet. So Lightroom basically just copied that same system. And you go from this view to, you double click on it and you get to one of the photographs. Here's another one from that same village. We had a herd of goats. I think there were 100 goats. And this boy is just, again, hey, they're letting me into their life without acting all stiff. He's totally relaxed. Again, that was sort of unusual, I think. A side story about goats. One time we came back. So where we were is we were living in this little, quote, village, which really was a hut. And then we'd walk another mile or so, maybe a mile and a half, to where this medical dispensary was that we were building. And I'll show you some photographs from there in a minute. We built it from the ground up. We built it from absolute pulling mud together to make adobe, making the tile roof, cutting the trees down and felling them and sawing them to make planks of wood, everything from nothing. I mean, this was a really incredible experience as a 17-year-old kid. Coming from California where you want building material, you go down to, we didn't have Home Depot then, but you go down to the building material place, load up your car, and you've got building material. We had to make every single part of it. So I was immersed in this. Can you imagine what a better education this was for my senior year than staying in a classroom where I was already bored out of my mind? What a remarkable experience. I'm sort of impressed myself. So now we get to the village, this is the medical dispensary where we had been working with two of the locals. This guy is a cool guy. His name is Fausto. And Fausto was one of the two workers. This is showing you everything we made. We made the mud. We made the adobe out of mud. The window frame, that was because we cut the wood and sliced it into panels, into sheets, planks. The only thing we did bring with us were some screws you can see there, but even this hand-carved knob here that allows it to open and close. And Fausto actually wasn't a very serious guy. He was kind of a fun-loving guy, but for some reason he gave me this really serious look. Now, this is an example of framing. Okay, the most fundamental tool that I learned in composition from my uncle Sambo, the same one that, gave me this camera, was framing. And he said, Marco, that's what he used to call me. Marco, your photographs will look better if you frame them. And that could be a door frame, a window frame. It could be a branch. It could be anything that helps kind of focus the viewer on where you want them to go. Well, this is a perfect frame. It's the window. Windows are great for framing. Doors are great. Trees, branches, sides of buildings. I pretty much always try to frame something. Anyway, this was probably my most memorable photograph from that whole trip. It's in this book. It's in actually a couple of my books. I love the photograph. I think you should love your own work, right? Why not? I mean, if you don't love it, why is somebody else going to love it? I love it because it tells me I had an entrance to this guy and he showed me a side of him. Now, here's another view of that. This is uncropped. And you can see I did a little cropping here. Sometimes I actually like to leave the edge of the film in place. But I decided, I would take away this piece of the photograph here. I felt it just sort of pulls your eye over, and this to me was the main part of the photograph. But I printed it in a lot of different forms. I don't always stick to whatever it is, as I told you. Okay, this one is a really interesting photograph. This looks like it could be a cowboy from, the early 20th century. And he is. What I was visiting and viewing in Mexico was like California 50 years earlier, or maybe 80 or 100 years earlier. Now, what's interesting about this photograph, I'll tell you a story, and this is also in the book. I had the privilege of capturing a show that Annie Leibovitz had put on, an exhibit at a museum in San Francisco. And because of various things, I was allowed to come in there and video her walking through the show. You can find that on my channel. And she and I went to the same art school, the San Francisco Art Institute. So when I saw her, I went up and introduced myself to her, and she was like, Mark, it's so good to see you. Anyway, after the show, this is a pretty interesting story. After the show, everybody left. All her, she had a lot of people around her. There were hundreds of people following her around. There was all the press were there. They all disappeared, and it was she and I walking through her exhibit together, just talking. And I told her I had an exhibit coming up from my photographs of Mexico, which I did. And she said, listen, one thing that's really important is have somebody else edit your work. And I thought for a minute, edit, does she mean like process? I'm not going to let anybody else process my photographs. What does she mean by that? She didn't mean that sense of editing. She meant picking out the photographs that you should put in the exhibit. Very wise words. You and I are often not the best choice of our own photography. So what happened was the curator of the exhibit actually came and saw my work, and then he said, let me see the other stuff. Let me see the contact sheets. So we went to the contact sheets, because some of these I hadn't even printed. And he pulled out this one. He said, we should make a print of it. Now, here's the deal, guys. This thing had just stayed as a negative and a tiny print. I'd never printed it before. And he marked this one and a whole bunch of other ones. And it was like a find. I think this is a fantastic photograph. It really shows something. It's like, here's this gaucho, this cowboy. His fly's a little unzipped too, which is kind of funny. But the background, there's still some spots on there you can see. I haven't spotted this out. There's dust. I shouldn't call your attention to it. But this isn't obviously the final print. But if it weren't for the guy that ran the gallery, I probably would never have done anything with this image. These are totally unprocessed. You can see the edge of the frame here. This was a kid that was helping us. Now he's digging. His name is Agre Pino, And you can see that what he's doing is we're making tiles. We made all those tiles there, you guys. We made them. This is a frame, and what he's doing is he's got mud mixed in here. It's going to go in the frame. And then there's another little tool, I don't think I see it in here, that goes under it. It makes it round. You put it under there and it forms it. And then you let the tiles dry. And I'm going to show you in a minute what you do after that. So again, I had the whole story. And part of what was driving me was this purpose. And I'm going to read to you something from the book in a minute. So there he is. This is Agre Pinot again. This is also not processed. But here's the frame. Here's another little kid. Everybody's kind of working with this to build this medical dispensary. This was so important. They had no medicine. They had no way of helping people when they were ill. And we were putting a medical dispensary, which is probably still there. Okay, so after we made all these clay tile roofs, we let them dry. And then on a specific night when they're all made, one guy came along and he built these fires around them. I think there were 4 of them all together, and this is one of the fires. If you've ever worked with pottery, they call it firing the pottery, which means you make it at a very high temperature, and it takes it from being like crumbly clay to hard clay. It's hard. It's now no longer clay, it's hard tile. So the way they did this is they just built these fires around and let them burn for hours. And in the morning, when things were cooled off, we pulled the tiles out. Bam! This isn't like going to Home Depot, guys. This is building everything on your own. In the middle of this whole excursion to Mexico, I was a hiker. I had done a lot of hiking. I'd done solo hikes. My first solo hike I did, I was just turning 15, and it was 8 days by myself in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the high country above Yosemite. 8 days, 15 years old. So I was used to hiking a lot and carrying my camera with me. I always carried my camera. In the middle of this trip to Mexico, the guy who was leading it had to go back and get some some supplies and that sort of thing. There was one other high school kid with me, and I decided I was going to just take off by myself and hike up the Rio Verde, which was the river that ran through this whole region. I hiked 80 miles. Took my camera with me, and these were 2 little boys that I ran into on the trail. I love this photograph. It's just, they're the guy looking back over his shoulder at me. The other guy, I think, is a little more nervous. Obviously, he looks a little awkward. He's got that beautiful case that he's carrying, and they have white shirts. Now, one composition technique is make sure you're getting contrasting elements. Now, what if they had brown or dark shirts on? It would have changed this whole photograph, because they kind of would have blended into the rocks and the ground and that sort of thing. But because they had those white shirts and he has a kind of a whitish hat, they stand out, and that helps build the composition. You've also got a leading line from them leading off on the trail. That's a square. You can see it's pretty much uncropped. That's a square image, again, from a square negative. So that's pretty much what you see is what you get out of the camera there. Anyway, that was another whole facet. And on top of this, you guys are going to think I'm super weird, but on top of this, not only did I hike 7 days, 80 miles, but I fasted the entire time. Fasting means you do not eat. I ate nothing. I drank tea, and that was it. Tea and water. I don't know why I did that, but I did it. So there's a story behind that. It's in my book. You can read about it. This was another kid, muchacho, I ran into. This is the Rio Verde. This is a very difficult shot, you guys. Okay. It's right in the middle of the day. I think the sun, you can see there's very little shadow. So it's pretty much straight overhead, which isn't a great time to photograph anybody. His face was shaded. But it's very harsh. You can see, and I've never really been able to change that very much. I mean, what you get in the photograph on the negative is that's what I have, and the image isn't something you can really change that much. But nonetheless, it's a photograph in the middle of the day. It shows that you can get a meaningful shot in the middle of the day. And here he is, again, not distracted by me. He's just showing me this is what it looked like. These were cowboys, and he was a young cowboy. Again, this could be United States 1875, and this was 1969 in Mexico. He has a little bag over the saddle here, carrying something, who knows what. There's a blanket here. And the horse, I love the way the horse is just kind of turning to me. He's got the bit in his mouth. He's kind of pulling on it. So I think he's turning the horse. There's a lot of content in that photograph. Okay, at the end of this trip, we went back to the little town of Ahoya, Mexico. And I borrowed the teacher's camera. He had a Nikon F. I think I had one roll. I believe this is Ektachrome. This is slide film. I took one roll of color film this whole trip. And these were some of the images that I came away with. Color film. These are the little boys and the very skinny cows. Looks like they're waiting to be fed. And there's a couple more. This is in that same village. In the foreground here, you can't really see him very well, but this is the guy who ran the whole thing. There was only he and myself, one other student at the end. There were just three of us at the end. At the beginning, I think there were two or three other students that came with us. It was a very small little group. So, interesting photograph. Again, these people are allowing me to enter their life, and I didn't distract them from what they were looking at. And this has become kind of a classic photograph for me. This is the doorway of the church in this little village. And that blue is what's really there. That blue is the blue of the door. And one of the things I found in areas where, maybe there's a lot of poverty and they don't have a lot of stuff, is they have paint. And they can make, really gorgeous, like that's a gorgeous color, isn't it? And it goes into the darkness of inside that door in the church. And I think that's just a different version. Actually, this is more authentic because you can see this was the actual slide. You can actually see some discoloration here, I think on the edges. Yeah, this is the actual edge of the slide here. And I tend to favor, in my processing more, just leave it alone. Use the whole crop rather than cropping it. But I've done it different ways, and you can see I changed it around a little bit as far as processing it. And I believe that's it. So there you guys have it. That's my trip to Mexico. Now, what happened as a result of that? I graduated from high school. I took all these photographs. When I came back, I spent days in my little darkroom immediately processing everything. There's that excitement, and I still feel that when I go out and shoot. I come back and process in Lightroom, but it's a lot more work when you got to go into your darkroom, develop every roll of film. Maybe there were 30 of them. Make contact prints of them. It's a whole process. And I had a pretty good orderly system, as I showed you. And I followed that system. I made the contact sheets, and I then started making prints of them. Years later, I turned it into a show, and many years later after that, these photographs appeared in one or more of my books. This is my most recent book called Create, which again has the whole story. And there's the kids. And I find that really fulfilling to be able to take my previously unprinted or unpublished work and use it in one of my books. I'm going to give you a summary of some of the things I learned from this. I wrote about it here, my life lessons. I wrote 7 things that I learned from this. I'll read you the last one. I said, and finally I learned that problems were solvable, not by running away, but by looking for a real solution. I was only able to realize this after I decided to work on a higher purpose. I wasn't just trying to bail out of high school, but I was going to help the people in this remote region of Mexico. And when I came across that idea, the doors opened. The principal said yes. My parents said yes. I got down there and it was like that opened the door even for me to capture these photographs. So there's the story, you guys. And I'm going to open some questions here, but I want to give you kind of 3 things that you can take away from this. Number 1, find a project that you're passionate about. You got to have that passion, like I said, purpose. It's got to be meaningful. I believe, okay, every photograph I take doesn't have that same level of purpose. So I don't want to mislead you on that. But I'm talking about this is we call street photography or documentary photography. It had a thread to it. These all fit together. They're like frames in a movie. We could put all those frames together and you put it together and you tell a story. So in storytelling, I believe obviously you're going to devote a lot of time to it. You have to be passionate about it. What if I didn't really care about these photographs and I didn't even bother to develop them, or I developed them and I just left them there? See, it has to be enough passion to push you through all the hard work and barriers and things that you're going to run into. Second thing, passion. Second thing, get fully involved and fully immersed. You can see I got to know these people and they opened their doors. Ed Kashi mentioned that. Like, you can't just arrive somewhere with a camera and start, there is that. There is street photography. Henri Cartier-Bresson did that, and I've done my share of street photography. I don't get to know anybody. I'm just boom. But this is different because I was immersed in the culture. Okay, so you get to know these people and you allow, because there's communication and connection, they allow you into their life. And the third thing is, don't just leave them sitting somewhere. Print them. I believe that the soul of photography is in prints. It's not in computer screens. It's not in iPhones. This is not the soul of photography. This is a tool, but if I just leave everything in here, what's the difference if I look at these, through, I don't know, take anything in here and I look at it on this little screen, what's the difference? I don't have that visceral connection like I have in a book or a print on the wall or a card even, these have a connection. People, when they receive these cards, they open it, and they know it's my print, and they're printed well enough so that people really get the feel for it. So those are my 3 kind of takeaways. There's probably more meaning than what I've given you. You can read about it, you guys. I hope you do read in my book, Create. I poured a lot of life into this book, and it's about the creative process. And not only are these my stories, but I have 12 very creative people that I interviewed. People like Chris Burkhardt, who we heard from, and he told us like his challenges. Because one of the reasons I wrote this book is I wanted to show that, creative people weren't just born that way. They had to overcome things. They had barriers there that they could either overcome or not. What if I had just kind of been an apathetic high school student and kind of gave in and said, all right, I'm just going to be bored this last semester. It's not going to be fun. I'm going to pout. I'm going to be, just fade away. Instead of like, I did have a passion and I pushed it through. Okay, now let's see if we've got, let's see what questions we have. Sandy, how long did you stay in Mexico during this project? It was really only about 5 or 6 weeks. It wasn't that long. There was a preparatory time period of a month or so. I think it took us a few days to drive there. We were there about for a month. and then drove back. So I think all in all, it was about 5 weeks of being in Mexico ish. And then I came back and I was already basically done with high school. So I just spent weeks and weeks in the darkroom. So that whole thing pretty much took the semester, that last semester. So anyone else? Okay. So this is an observation from Tom. People in places of poverty don't have a lot, but they do have paint. Yes, it's true. Paint can be a pretty powerful composition tool as well. And actually pointed that out. You might not think of paint or color rather as a compositional tool, but that's what this means is a compositional element. It's color that's framing everything. Everything is rather framed around the color here, which is a compositional tool. How long was the gap between your trip and the show? Decades. Now I printed these. I showed them somewhere. I did some kind of little exhibit. Again, you'll read about this in this book. I left photography for many years. Many years I went into a different path. It's not that I didn't take photographs, but they were snapshots for decades. And I re-entered photography in the digital age, and I had to learn it all over again. So the gap was 35 years until I had that show. But it was really fulfilling. It was like everything that I'd poured into those photographs came back when I did the exhibit, and they published it in the San Francisco Chronicle. It was a really fulfilling feeling to dig those photographs out and print them. And by the way, they were not printed digitally. They were printed in the darkroom for that show in 2006-ish. I actually found a student from the school that I went to, the San Francisco Art Institute, who printed them for me because that time I didn't have a darkroom, but I directed him. And I still have those prints. They're really amazing. Would you consider the great partnerships when it comes to photographers working with journalists, either in newspapers or magazines over the years? I've done my own writing, so I don't partner with anybody else. I think Dan Milner's the same way. He writes and he photographs. So I don't have that experience. Your guys like National Geographic photographers, Bob Holmes, obviously, he took the photographs, he sent them back to the Geographic, and somebody else wrote the article. That's not something I have experience with, so I can't tell you about that kind of partnership. I do love collaboration in any work. Video production, for instance, has to be collaborative. There's so many moving parts. You have your, people on the set, then you have audio people. You have all these different people you must collaborate with. So collaboration now, here's the other side of it. Even though when I write my books, I write them, they're handed off. The writing is handed off to many different editors who I work with. And the design, I'm not a designer. They lay out the pages. And thankfully, I don't have to do that because that's a whole skill set into itself. It's like, there are those guys again. So you have to work together side by side with editors, with designers. It's a team action for sure. For sure, writing a book. And doing that exhibit was a team action because the curator helped me pick out the photographs. And I had somebody else print them. I brought them to him. He matted them and framed them and put them on the wall. So it's a whole team action. Have you sent some of your pictures to the people you met and photographed? No, I haven't. And sadly, most of them are gone. There's a really after story to this. This whole region got taken over by the drug lords, sadly enough. I actually wanted to go back and film, and I was advised not to because it's become a very dangerous region, unfortunately. Another reason why we have to rid this planet of these dangerous drugs, because unfortunately, places like Ahoya, Mexico, and these villages have become completely hammered down by the drug lords and just took over, and that killed that civilization. It's a sad story. We have to do something about it. I do intend to make a documentary using these photographs, finding whatever footage I can available to me. I'm going to do that. That's been on my bucket list for a while. I definitely want to put that all together. Okay, guys. Well, listen, you got the inside story from Marc Silber. There's a lot more to me than meets the eye. I have a lot more adventures than that. I mean, I had a pretty interesting upbringing, and you can see. But photography was kind of the central part of it, as it still is. Photography allowed me to put it together, and it's that way of seeing. You know, that's what a camera helps you do. It's to see the world around you. Here's one more. What film did you use? I'm pretty sure the film that I used, I mean, I was trying to find this. I actually have notes, cards, and I couldn't find them. They're somewhere. But in the card, it says what film it is, what developer I used, and maybe what paper I printed it on. But I used either Tri-X. You guys remember Tri-X? Tri-X is, we called it ASA. It was the same thing as we call ISO, but it was American instead of international. 400, and that's considered really fast. Now we blow that away, and it's kind of ridiculous how, you know, you can shoot in any kind of light. But I either used Tri-X. I think I had a mix of Tri-X plus X, which was 125, and Panatomic X, which was one of my favorite films, ISO 40. Very fine grain, and it gives you beautiful reproduction. The paper was Kodak. I can't tell you for sure what paper I printed it on. I tended to go with a more contrasty paper. You know, I can dig those things up. One last question. Street photography versus documentary. What's the major difference? Is street seen as documentary? I think the difference is documentary is a series. It's like you're taking a film and you're, like I've shown you, this was documentary work. If I took one of those out, I could say, well, that was a street photograph. Do you see the difference? You know, like Henri Cartier-Bresson, you see like his images from all over the place put in a book, but it's not necessarily documenting one place and one time. Those are street photographs that are you know, put together in a collection. Whereas a documentary, you're going into an area like this and photographing it over many, many days or months or weeks or whatever. Okay. Well, thank you, Anka. I love having you listen to me. I mean, I consider it a privilege to talk to you guys and to, you know, have you let me into your life. I'm going to sign off. I got a yoga class in 12 minutes, and I do need yoga during this time period. I need long walks, and I hope you guys are taking your walks. I hope you're journaling. I hope you're working on your photographs. You know, I'm busier than I've ever been. I've got all kinds of stuff that I'm working on. I've got new courses that I'm developing. I've got, you know, these live shows, and it's good to be busy. Okay. My final advice to you, because I always ask, you know, my guests, what final advice do you have? And I'm going to ask myself, Mark, what final advice do you have for our viewers? My final advice is do what I said. Find something you're passionate about. It could be in your own house. It could be photographing your family and friends or your dog. But whatever it is you're passionate about. You can see I photograph my dog a lot. I love her. I have a lot of passion about her. Find something you're passionate about. Get fully involved in it. Make prints. And on that note, remember our friends at Bay Photo. They're sponsoring us. And the reason they're sponsoring us is because I love their work. They do high quality work. You can work with their team to get exactly what you want. And again, you'll get an order 25% off on your first order. Make your own book. Make books. I love books. Like this is a book. Before I write a book and print it, it's a notebook, or it's put together like this. You can make your own book really easily, and they'll make books for you as well. Okay, make sure you guys are part of the AYP Club, because that's where we carry this on outside of these YouTube lives. I want you guys to meet up there. Jared will put the link on there. We will, you have to be allowed into the group. As long as you tell us where you came from, you'll be allowed in there and participate. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. And there's a lot of action going on in that group. If you haven't already done this, will you please subscribe and enable the bell? Will you help me reach a lot more people by sharing these videos with your friends? Tell them about AYP. Tell them to come along. Tell them to watch these videos, okay? Leave your comments. We're also going to have this up in show notes. By the way, we are launching an audio version of this as a podcast. This will hopefully, I don't know if it's going to go up this coming week, maybe the week after, but you can listen to these, which is cool. You can re-listen to them maybe later when you're driving in your car or you're working out or whatever. You can re-listen to them. It's just another way of getting the information. Okay, I don't think I've left out anything. You guys, I really do love you. I love having you along with me. It's, again, very fulfilling to be able to tell you these stories. I know you probably have your own version of what you've done. I want to hear them. You can put them in the AYP Club. We can work together and create our own amazing creative community. So I just want you guys, remember to get out and capture your own images of life. See you soon. Take care. Stay well.